I've been filming for over an hour on this one episode, so it's gonna be long. Okay. Oh, I'm excited. What's she doing? Alright. I'm just gonna jump straight into this one. Hi guys, welcome back to my screenwriting series. My name's Sian Taylor, self-taught screenwriter, passing on what I've learned to you guys. Let's go. Episode 2. Where's the story? Where's the story? In this episode, I'm going to be talking about structure type. What am I talking about? What am I talking about? In this episode, I'm going to be talking about different narrative structure types, developing plot, and developing story. But where's the story? But where's the story? See, this is good, but where's the story? I'm sure we've all heard this at least once. And if you've heard this, you've probably thought, you've read the script, you obviously don't understand the story. There's a story there, you obviously just don't understand it. The story wasn't meant for you, that's why you don't understand it. 9 times out of 10, there is no story. So how do we find that story? Now, the story is a series of events that happen, whereas plot is the sequence of the telling of the events. I mean, so one of my favourite films of all time is Forrest Gump, and if you've seen Forrest Gump, you know that the story jumps back and forth between a present timeline and a past timeline, because Forrest is in the present talking about his past. Yes, if you're interested, that is called an episodic structure, because it's in the present, but we visit episodes of the past, and then it comes back to the present, goes back to an episode of the past. That's called an episodic structure. Why did I start talking about Forrest Gump? I love that film so much. Point being, the story of Forrest Gump and his life could be told in an entirely different structure, which would have the same story, but it would have given it a different plot. How can we develop a plot to tell the story in the most effective way? Either way, there are so many different structure types that you can find online, in books, in interviews, etc, etc. There are so many. There are so many. I've highlighted some that I've found over the years, some that I've worked with, and I'm going to tell them to you now. So I want to start this episode by talking about the most basic, well-known plot structure, which is the 3-act structure. Now, I mentioned Aristotle in my last episode. Gonna bring him back today, good old Aristotle. He is known as the creator of the 3-act structure, and I mentioned it in the last episode, but I want to bring it back here. Aristotle wrote, a whole story is what has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that is the 3 acts, basically. A beginning, a middle, and an end. So let's quickly run through the 3-act structure. So the first act is the setup, and it's basically where we just introduce the world, introduce the main character, introduce any side characters we need to know. Also in the first act we see our first plot point, which is a challenge presented to the protagonist. So this plot point is where they're given an opportunity or a goal or a challenge, which then forces us to go into the second act. So the second act is confrontation. This is where we see a rising in action, the stakes are getting higher, they're working towards that goal to win something, to achieve something, to get something. Now I do want to emphasise here, and I will talk about it in the future, you will hear this from me again, there needs to be something at stake. There needs to be something for the characters to lose, or the protagonist to lose, to make this an intriguing, I want to watch more of this type of film. In the second act, this is also where you'll see the antagonistic force come into play a bit more. The second act can also be seen as having 2 halves, and around the halfway point in the second act, you'll have the midpoint, which is basically a point of no return, basically. At this point, they're in too deep, they can't give up. And it's not until the second half of Act 2 where we have our second plot point. All hope is lost. This is where the protagonist is about to give up. Basically, all hope is lost. They've fought a good fight, but they're like, this isn't going to work. Something bad happens. We see how much they're about to lose by giving up, because the stakes have been so high. Again, this second plot point pushes us into Act 3, and Act 3 is the resolution. So the protagonist finds a solution to their problem. You might hear the term crisis used, you might hear the term climax used. It's where all the tension, all the action is building up to just before this climax or this crisis, you'll have that second plot point, which is all hope is lost. We're looking back down like, oh shit, no, it's leading up to here. And this is where you'll find the big final battles in all those Marvel films, or the big final boss battle in any superhero film or video game. This is the climactic scene, the crescendo. All of this is happening in Act 3. Now the character can either find a solution where they win, or maybe they still lose something, and then we see the falling action, the resolution. So that is the 3-act structure. This is the most basic structure you will ever find. It's the oldest trick in the book. Beginning, middle, end. Setup, confrontation, resolution. Any or most narrative structure types that you will ever see is some sort of adaptation of this 3-act structure. Having said this, I now want to introduce you to the 6-stage structure. Now I'm going to do this for every episode, but I just want to say quickly, any videos that I've used in the past that I find incredibly helpful, I'm going to reference, link in the description, and add to a playlist. So I'm giving it all to you. There is a very useful, I can't remember whether it was an interview or a presentation, there might be multiple videos. I've watched a lot of his videos where he talks about his plot structure, and I will put that in the description for you to watch at your own pleasure, or your own leisure, or both. His 6-stage plot structure is split into 2 aspects, where you have the inner journey and the outer journey. Now, the outer journey is the goal and the accomplishment of the goal. Now, the outer journey is the character's goal and the accomplishment of the goal. The other aspect is the inner goal. This is more of the personal journey for the character. It's usually something they need rather than what they want. It's usually where they have to overcome something or they learn something. It's an inner personal journey for them, and this is also where we see a lot of character development. Now, because this episode I'm focusing on plot structure, I'm going to focus on Michael Hauge's outer journey plot structure, but in the next episode I'm going to be talking a lot more about characters and character development, so I will be referencing and returning back to this plot structure to discuss more of the inner journey, but I'm going to discuss now the outer journey. So in Act 1 we have the setup. In any plot structure, the first point will always be a setup, an introduction, establishment. You want to introduce the world, the normal, the comfort zone. So just like Aristotle's 3-act structure, the first plot point is opportunity or challenge. We're creating a finishing line. The character is presented with a challenge, a goal. Stage 2 is new situation. This is where the character is entering a new world. Things are starting to change, they're entering a new. We're no longer in their normal, things are starting to change. And that becomes more apparent in the second plot point, which is change of plans. The character's no longer living in their comfort zone, they're no longer chilling in their established equilibrium. There's a new plan on the table, we're going. Stage 3 is progress. Again, just like Aristotle's 2nd act, this is where we see a lot of the rising action, the stakes are getting higher, they're working towards something. Just like in the 2nd act of Aristotle's 3-act structure, in the 2nd act of Michael Hauge's 6-stage plot structure, we see the turning point 3, point of no return. There is no going back. We're in too deep. You may decide to make this a physical thing where maybe they've crossed a bridge and then the bridge burns down and the only way they can get back across is to keep going forward to a spaceship to fly back over. That's just an example. Like I said, it might be a physical point of no return or it might be a metaphorical point of no return. Now, as I'm talking about the outer journey, you might think more of a physical point of no return, but it might also be, and this might apply more to the inner journey, but it could, depending on your story, the point of no return might be something clicks within the character and it's a mental thing that there's a point of no return, they can't go back. So in stage 4, we start to see more complications. Again, we're still in the 2nd act, so there's more rising action. The stakes are getting higher. There's a lot more to lose, but there's a lot more fights within the character. As the action is rising, there has to be higher stakes, there has to be more to lose, and the character has to want the end goal even more. It's almost like we can taste it. Say the end point for the character is to run a marathon. It's like they can taste it. They know they can do it. But just as we think that they've got it. We see the fourth plot point, the fourth turning point. There's a major setback. So maybe this character that really wants to run a marathon sprains their ankle, twists their ankle, and they think, fuck, how am I meant to run with a broken ankle? There's a major setback. Now this is usually the antagonistic force coming into action, usually where the villain is coming up on top and we think the villain's gonna win and the hero's gonna die. This, in relation to Aristotle's 3-act structure, is where all hope is lost. Because before we could just taste it was so close, but now it's so far. Maybe a writer has been writing pen to paper a whole book. Major setback might be there's a house fire and he loses everything. It might be we're in a battle and even though we're losing soldiers, we're still winning the battle. We might be losing the fight, we're winning the battle. But the major setback is a whole new wave of soldiers from the other side are coming in and they've got all this new equipment and we're here in ashes and they still look like they haven't got a bruise on them. That's the major setback. It's the glimmer of hope and then it's torn away from you. I love that. I love this part in a story. This is where you then get the emotional like, oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. You got this. Do it for your dead mum. Do it for your dead brother. It's usually a dead relative. You've got to do this for the sake of Earth. You know, that sort of moment. And then we have stage 5, the final push. I'm getting really into this. Can you tell how much I'm loving this? I'm really excited for this series. Stage 5, the final push. Let's go. The main character gets a new idea of something different to do. Maybe that's explicitly told to the audience through a new battle plan, or maybe this isn't told at all and we go back into battle and we're surprised as the audience of what our characters bring out. It's your job as the writer in these moments to give the audience hope, rip it away from them, and then give it back to them. All in one hit. So during this final push stage, it might seem like they've got no chance. They're still gonna lose. It's not even worth trying. But this is where we get to our 5th turning point, our 5th plot point, which is the climax. Again, just like Aristotle's 3-act structure, the crisis, the climax, the climactic scene, the crescendo, the big final boss battle. This is the point where everything has been leading up to and it's intense. Whether it's as big as a Marvel superhero boss battle, all the characters are involved, you know what I'm talking about, or it's as small as a baker going to court to win his bakery back. It could be a really climactic, emotional, explosive conversation between two people, or it could be this character's dream once-in-a-lifetime performance. So like in films like Whiplash or Black Swan, where they've got their big final performance and they have nothing to lose. They are throwing everything into this final performance. And stage 6, you have the aftermath. Has your character won or lost that thing? Did they retrieve it? Did they achieve it? What happens after? Stage 6 I would refer to as Dan Harmon's return and having change segments. The setup that you established in the beginning, we return to that, but what's different now? How is the world different? How are the characters different? What have we lost? What have we gained? Did our characters win? How are we celebrating? Did they lose? How are we not celebrating? Are we in tears or are we in tears? Do you want your audience to be in tears or do you want them laughing? Do you want them celebrating? Do you want them crying? The purpose that you established in the first episode, have you achieved that? How are you going to achieve that in this aftermath segment? Aftermath. So yes, that was Michael Hughes' 6-stage plot structure, focusing more on the outer journey. Like I said, in the next episode, when I'm talking more about characters and character development, I will return back to this plot structure and focus more on the inner journey. So if you decide to use this plot structure for your story, define your outer journey, and then when we come back to it next episode, you can use that as a basis to then look at the inner journey. Maybe, if you'd like to. It's up to you. So moving on swiftly, I also want to introduce you to Todorov's narrative theory. The idea that narrative moves forward in a chronological order, and there are 5 stages that a character will go through. This is less of an act structure and more of a series of events that you can apply to your story. If you study, I don't know about other countries, but if you study any sort of film studies or media studies, creative media in the UK, chances are you've heard of Todorov's narrative theory. So let's just jump straight into it. Todorov's narrative theory is 5 stages. The first stage is equilibrium. Now, you may have heard me mention equilibrium in this episode and in last episode. The actual definition of equilibrium is a state of rest or balance. It's more used in like chemistry and physics. Equal forces, opposing forces, everything's equal. That's the equilibrium. There is no significant pressures or forces or powers that are affecting this state of equilibrium. So this is the normal. Now you may think I'm over defining the term equilibrium, but I know not a lot of people know what the actual word equilibrium means. But I also want to define what equilibrium means because all around me are familiar faces. I do also want to define what equilibrium means because in terms of an introduction to your story, actually defining a balance in your character's world is necessary. So when I say all forces are equal, all powers and influences are equal, it gives you a clean slate. There's a balance, there's an equilibrium. Are we all on the same page? Now, stage 2 is a disruption. So before we had the equilibrium, now we have the disruption. So there is a new force, a new influence, a new power that's coming into play, but it's not equal anymore, so we're being tilted. There is an event, so it could be an introduction of a new character or just a world event which causes a disruption to the story, to the equilibrium. We're no longer on a straight road, we're being knocked off course. Stage 3 is recognition. This is where the character recognises that there's a disruption to order, there's been a disruption to their equilibrium. This is where we see that kick into action, that opportunity, that challenge. It's basically where the character recognises that something's wrong and they need to do something about it. Stage 4 is attempt to repair. So yes, this would also be the progress, the rising action, the rising stakes. It is the characters attempting to repair the damage that's been caused. And stage 5 is the return to equilibrium, or the restoration of equilibrium. So this stage 5, the restoration of equilibrium or return to a new equilibrium, I would compare to the crisis, the climax, and the falling action, the aftermath. So for example, if we were going to apply Todorov's narrative structure to a film like the first Shrek film, we would see that the first stage, state of equilibrium, is Shrek is living happily in his swamp. Stage 2, there's a disruption. All fairy tale creatures are sent to Shrek's swamp. Stage 3, a recognition. Shrek meets Donkey and together they go to Lord Farquaad. He says Shrek must rescue the princess if he wants his land back. Stage 4, an attempt to repair. He rescues the princess, he rescues Fiona. And stage 5, there's a return to equilibrium. He falls in love with the princess and they live happily ever after. So yes, there's a lot less detail in Todorov's narrative theory, but it gives you clear-cut plot points. So another example would be Finding Nemo. Stage 1, Nemo lives happily with his dad. Stage 2, Nemo is captured after being dared to touch the boat, touches the butt. Stage 3, Nemo's dad, Marvin, realises his son is gone. He's been taken. Stage 4, Marvin meets Dory and they look for Nemo. This is most of the film, most of Act 2. And stage 5, they find Nemo and live happily ever after again. Like I said, there are so many different narrative structures that you could use and apply to your story, and some stories benefit more from different act structures. Some writers benefit more from different act structures. Like I said in the first episode, it really is dependent on what works for you and what doesn't work for you, and also what works for your story and what doesn't work for your story. So have a play with those act structures. But like I said, remember in last episode where I did mention Dan Harmon's story circle, I introduced that one to you because that's the one that I have found has worked best for me recently. Though I did want to introduce you to Michael Hauge's plot structure, circle, stages, blah, because I have used that one a lot in the past too. And his structure is a lot more in detail, a lot more in depth, but I know that might be a bit intimidating for beginners. So that's why I also wanted to introduce you to Todorov's narrative structure, because I know that was one of the first structures that I learned in college. So that there's a whole array of structures that you can use. So in the next episode, I'm going to be talking to you about Michael Hauge's plot structure, but the inner journey. We're going to look more into character development. Yeah, in the next episode, we're going to be talking about characters, character development, and subplots. Basically, are we excited? I'm excited. So yeah, guys, thank you for coming back for episode 2. I really hope you're enjoying watching these, because I am enjoying making them. As you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, I was getting very excited during this episode, and I'm very into character development, so next episode I'm going to be very excited. Oops. I've already received a lot of great feedback from the first episode. Thank you. I know screenwriting is a bit of a niche subject, and not everyone subscribed to this channel is going to be interested in screenwriting, so whether you're interested in screenwriting or not, if you're watching this video, thank you for watching. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe, like and comment, etc, but I would like to see, I would love to see people getting involved, because like I said in the first episode, this is a discussion. This is what I love and I'm getting so excited. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Have a good evening, and I will see you in the next one. That's all I have to say about that. Woo! Stop it. An hour.